Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Sober Living Stories podcast. Meet Jojo Godinez. Today, he's going to share his powerful testimony on how a life sentence in prison led him to his life's purpose. As a reform gang member from the streets of Los Angeles, today Jojo is a community leader, motivational speaker, coach, author, and recovery advocate. He is an example of his own message, which says that your past does not have to determine your future. I'm so excited to have you on the show today, Jojo. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Jessica. I'm looking forward to it.
I first met you through an online forum where you had thrown a sentence out, and I responded because I was intrigued by what trapped families was. And so I investigated that a little further, and I found you on YouTube with your trapped families. It's an online community I had read dedicated to supporting families who are affected by incarceration, substance abuse, and addiction.
Hmm.
And, I watched one episode after another. And I love that you're here. I think you have a powerful message, and it's all yours. If you just want to start from your personal story up and until what you're doing today.
Okay, well, thank you. So I was born and raised here in Los Angeles, California. Both mother and father were in the home. I had three siblings, three sisters. I had a couple of stepbrothers that weren't necessarily by blood at all. They were godchildren of my mother and father that they were taking care of. And I grew up in an area that was infested with gangs, drugs, prostitution. I mean, it was really wild here. I was born in 1973, and during the 70s was like the disco era. But at the same time, in LA, that was like the birthing of serious gangs here in LA. I mean, I believe we're like the capital of, gang violence, and it's very evident from my life being surrounded. I mean, you couldn't go from one block to another without, seeing the effects of the gangs, whether it was gang writing on the walls, somebody being stabbed, shot, murdered. And from a very young age, I'm talking about from 4 years old, Jessica, I can go back and I remember it so vivid, as if it was just yesterday. I could close my eyes and picture the first time I seen somebody killed right in front of my house. And I remember my mom grabbing me and saying, get away from the windows, come over here and stay over here. I'm only 4 years old. And, this was, almost 45 years ago that I still remember it so clearly. And from that point on in my life, it just continued to progress more and more. My older siblings eventually would get involved in the gangs. And I remember probably about at 5 years old, my mother and father decided to relocate us probably about 30 miles away, but it looked like it was a more suburban area. There was grass and trees, and where I was at before, it was mainly concrete. I mean, there was no front yards to play in. Everything was concrete. In the area of East LA where I was from, our houses were on hills. Garages were on the bottom of our houses, and then there was streets, and there was really no grass or anywhere to play like football in the front yards. But where they moved us, which was like 30 miles, still within LA County, we had a big front yard, and there was like, all the houses were all connected, so you could just run from neighbor to neighbor's house through the grass, and it was fun. And when I got there, it looked like, okay, we're in a different environment, but come to find out that that same neighborhood where they moved us was infested with gangs. And it was crazy because it didn't look like a gang infested neighborhood, not like in LA, like the city of Los Angeles. We moved to the city of La Puente, which is in the San Gabriel Valley area. Here in Los Angeles, we have the Hollywood district, we have, Santa Monica and the more the different areas of LA County, and we moved to what's called the San Gabriel Valley in the city of La Puente. And within that city, there's I don't know how many gangs. Just within that city alone, there's maybe 20 different gangs. And it wasn't long till I found myself where they moved us to. There was probably about 20, 25 kids, all my same age, And like I said, I had my mother and my father in my home. My mother and father were hard workers. I would never consider myself, one of them poor stories that, took me to the streets, or a lack of love in my home, or, we were never without. My mom and dad worked hard. They both worked. My father worked in a steel mill, working with steel, and my mother worked in warehouses for the most part. They weren't home from early mornings to early evenings. They were gone. So right after school, I found myself in the streets hanging out with other kids that um, probably didn't have the same morals and values as I was being brought up with. My father was a Vietnam veteran with the United States Marine Corps, so there was a lot of discipline in my home. There was a lot of structure in my home. We had rules, and there was a lot of discipline. Growing up, discipline didn't lack in my home. When I did wrong, I was very well disciplined for it, with physical pain, I would say. My father, I mean, back then, I mean, getting a good old-fashioned whipping was normal. Um, but on the other hand, my friends that come from single homes, the fathers weren't in the picture. Um, Drugs and alcohol were a lot in their families, and they lacked a lot of discipline. So I found myself interacting with these 20, 25 kids, every single day in the streets. And I'm not going to say we were bad kids just breaking the law, but we were kids. A lot of us were young boys at that time. We didn't have cell phones and computers. We played in the streets. We had rock fights and BB gun fights, and we played with slingshots and stuff like that, and rode bikes everywhere. And it was like a fun time, being a kid. Unfortunately though, I was out on the streets a lot with my friends, and it was in them streets where I started seeing a lot of drugs. During that time, the early 80s, was rock cocaine, a lot of addiction to rock cocaine. And there was heroin, there was cocaine, regular cocaine, and then we had what was our PCP, our elephant tranquilizer, what we used to call it growing up. And seeing the effects of that on people, because like I said, my neighbors were gang members, and they would be on PCP, and we would be playing baseball up front, and they would look like zombies. Like, look at this fool, like fool can't even stand up. Or we had them old hobos, the older homies that were drinking 40 ounces out of the brown paper bags in the streets and
Right.
stuff. And then we had people, cooking heroin in the spoons and stuff. So as young kids, I remember too, my homeboy's uncle, he was a heroin addict, older guy, and he would like, hey Jojo, hold this spoon for me real quick. And I would literally be like 6 years old, wanting to go play sports, holding a cooking needle while he was cooking
Oh
his
my
heroin. He's like, just hold it for me real quick. And I'm right there like, hurry up and do this,
God.
So this was what I seen, I seen a lot of marijuana, especially marijuana. I mean, I used to see that by the pound, as a young boy, and they started giving us. Um, I was probably maybe, I want to say maybe 8, 9 years old when we started learning how to sell like dime bags of marijuana, to other kids around the neighborhood and stuff. And that's where our first drug dealing started to come in. And of course, we're experimenting with everything, And in my house, my father was an alcoholic. I would say, I didn't really know what addiction was or anything like that, what alcoholism was, until later on, in my 20s or whatnot. But my dad, every day when he would come home from work with a six pack, a 12 pack or something, go to the room and just start drinking until he passed out. But it's crazy though, because, you know, people would say that he was a functioning alcoholic because he would go to work. He stood in the same job for, I want to say almost, almost 40 years, almost my whole life. He was at the same job, and every day he would come home and drink and pass out and wake up at 5 in the morning to go to work the next day. Um, I noticed today though, that um, the behaviors that followed his addiction was, yeah, he was a violent person, he was very angry, especially when he was like sober. My dad was like one of them happy drunks, where he would get drunk and start giving the kids money, and being flirtatious, with my mother, like, trying to hug on her and kiss on her and stuff. And my mom would push him away, like, get away from me, you're drunk, or whatever. But when he wasn't drunk and he was like craving, that's when he would become more violent, more, aggressive in his tone. And But I know my dad that way his whole life, so I never considered him an alcoholic or anything like that. But later on, I mean, there was times he would come home and the car would be halfway up our driveway with the door open. I'm like, what happened to the car? They were like, yeah, he came home, drunk or whatever, because he used to stop by the bar too sometimes. So
On the way
he'd
home.
come home with a six pack, but he had already been at the bar for like 2 hours. Like that would be his way of winding down before coming home. Um, but I never judged him as an addict because a lot of my family and a lot of my friends' families like did that same stuff.
Mhm.
The younger generation, though, the gang members that were doing, rock cocaine and marijuana, PCP and stuff, I didn't even realize they were drug addicts either. I didn't know none of that. It was just normal behavior for us. And I had the motor homies that were drug addicts, that were cold drug addicts. They would steal things in the middle of the morning. They'll come to your house and steal all your copper piping while you're sleeping and wake up and, you don't have no water running through your house. Like, man, what's all my water? All the copper is gone. And they would steal air conditioning units from the windows, and it's just like crazy stuff. But to us, it was like, that's just them. Um, but yeah, as I got older and older, the gang influence became really strong in my life. By the time I was like 10 years old, I had seen more and more murders in our streets. A lot of my house was getting shot up, and what I mean, during the 80s, we had what was called the drive-by shootings, where people would just drive by your house and shoot up your house. And that was the situation for me and my family and a lot of people in our neighborhood. That was the normal routine. You'd be sleeping and hear bullets flying, and you're just checking, to see if it was your house. You know what I mean? And sometimes your house, sometimes it was the neighbor's house, and that was just kind of normal. And I found myself in my early teens getting more and more involved in that, Jessica, where um, because as a young kid, in the mix of all of that, I was playing baseball. I was into a lot of organized sports. That's one of the best things my father offered me was like, sign me up for football, sign me up for baseball. I was in kickboxing. I did a lot of sports as a young kid. I always was like a team player. So when I got into the gang thing, it was kind of like, and plus all these kids I grew up with since I was, 5 years old, we were all in kindergarten, worked our ways up through elementary, junior high. And we all grew up together and we learned how to like protect one another, in the streets and stuff. And so by the time I became a gang member, it wasn't like I just woke up and said, I want to be a gang member today. It was kind of just like a smooth transition to where we just found ourselves being more and more in violent behaviors. Now I'm using a lot of guns and knives and stuff, taking, weapons to school and stuff. And um, I was arrested numerous times for different things, but at 16 years old is when it got really serious for me. I was arrested for a very serious crime involving a shooting, and I was tried as an adult at 16 years old. And eventually, I would go through trial and everything, and I was found guilty and sentenced to 45 years to life. 45 years to life. And here in
At
California,
six at
16 years
16.
old. Yeah, by the time I was found guilty, I was already 18 years old. Um, but we have over here our youth prisons. When you commit crimes as a youth and you got to go through what's called a fitness hearing, and if they find that you're capable of programming in the juvenile system still, they'll let you go there until you're 25, and when you're 25, then they'll send you to prison. So that's kind of the case for me. I ended up going to youth prison here in California um, at 18 years old, and then I stood there until I was 24 years old. They ended up killing a counselor there in the youth prison where I was at, and then they sent us all out to prison a little bit early. So I didn't get to stay till 25, and then I ended up going to prison. But let me back up. During
Yeah.
the course, yeah, let me just back up just a little bit. During the course of being sentenced, there was like a long stretch of from me being found guilty to me being sentenced. Because I had to go because I was a juvenile and they were trying to see whether or not they were going to send me in prison or to youth prison. They sent us to these fitness hearings where we had to go see psychiatrists and all these different people to
Mhm.
determine whether or not sending me to prison would be more detrimental, to my good. So when I went, they were like, he's able to go to prison, but we find that it would be more better for him his development if he was to go to youth prison first. So during that time of waiting to be sentenced, I was involved while I was in jail. I was still committing crimes. I
Mhm.
was in LA County Jail, and I got really involved in the politics between like Mexicans and blacks and whites and the different prison politics that go on. I figured I'm going to spend the rest of my life in here. I'm never going to home. That was a fact. I really believed it, and everybody at that time knew that, if you were sentenced to life, you weren't coming home. Nobody was
Mhm.
coming home during that time period. And what happened is, I ended up getting into a violent altercation where somebody was stabbed. And during the time when I was in the hole, which is like the jail within the jail, I'm segregated from the main population. I had my spiritual awakening. I had my encounter with my higher power, who I call Jesus Christ, and it was a life-changing encounter. I wasn't really a religious person. There was really no fear in where I was going. I was content with where I was at, but for the first time something happened where I felt remorse for my victims. I felt guilt for the lifestyle that I had, now fully engaged in. I felt really empathetic towards my victims, where it was like, what, like I really, I identified myself as an animal. I literally felt like, what, like, man, like I belong in here. I
Mhm.
came to that realization that the things I was doing was unhuman. Determined that I was an evil person and deserved to be locked up for the rest of my life. That, society didn't deserve my presence, because of my actions. Here I am in jail already, and I'm still doing, evil and stuff. And
So, are you talking about the things that you did outside of jail, which got you into jail, or the things that you did in jail, or both?
outside both, it was just a lifespan of just
Lifestyle.
conviction. It was like, I'm telling you, when I had that moment, I didn't. I kind of, throughout my youth, I was introduced to, God as a creator, you know what I'm saying? But I never had a personal relationship with God. I never knew that you could actually have such a relationship with God. I never, understood that, I kind of grew up Catholic, but it was mainly like a holiday Catholic, like for
Mhm.
Christmas, Easter, we would go. I probably went to a Catholic church more for funerals, a couple of weddings, a couple of baptisms or whatnot, but a regular Sunday mass, like really being into it, it never penetrated, you know what I mean? During the
Mhm.
times there, I was just looking at my watch, like, hurry up, like, let's go. It was never like a big deal or a big part of my life. Excuse me. But at that time, after that stabbing, something happened where like realization hit me, like this is going to be the rest of my life acting like this animal that I am, And since I was so young, in the prison politics, they like to use youngsters more than anything to establish,
Mhm.
different causes, So here I am, raising my hand to pretty much be like an assassin in there, pretty much be a torpedo is what is the terminology they would use. Like when something needed to be taken care of, I would be right there, like I'll take care of it, whether it was like attacking an informant or a sexual predator, all the ones that the prisoners consider no good, like they shouldn't be here among everybody else.
Mhm.
Or somebody owed money to somebody, they would to be like, "Hey, Jojo, you got this?" I'd be like, "I got it," and I would go and do something for somebody else. A lot of the violence that I was afflicting on other people wasn't even my business. It wasn't even something that they did to me. And it was in that moment where I saw myself like a puppet. I felt like, you know, um, like things have changed, from when I was out on the streets, a gang member, doing things for my neighborhood and for my friends. Now I'm doing things for strangers, people I just met, and it just wasn't adding up. And then I had my mother was such a loving mother. She was always by my side. And I started thinking about her and the struggle. She would come to see me and she'd be crying and like, it was kind of like my mom didn't deserve the stuff that I put her through. They had got me a private lawyer, they put their house up to try to bail me out at times. They paid thousands of dollars for these different attorneys, and my house was being shot up because of me. People would drive up to my mother and pull guns out on her, thinking I was in the car because I was doing things in her car. And it was just, I brought a lot of pain to my family, and at this moment, all of this was coming back to memory, and to my conscience of like, I done so much bad, and it was so weird though, because at that moment I had asked God to forgive me, Jessica. The only way I knew how, I was like, you know what, God, if you're real, I need you to change this heart of mine, and in that very moment, it's not like a movie scene. An angel didn't appear. Virgin Mary didn't show up. I didn't hear no thunder or anything saying like, "You're forgiven, Jojo." I didn't hear nothing or have any physical signs, but I felt a peace within my heart, like as if God really was forgiving me. And from that moment, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect, but I had cried out and asked God to change this heart. And a couple of months down the line, when they released me back to the main line for that incident, I was telling God, like, God, just like help me not to get into trouble, help me not to, go that route. And like I said, I'm still young, I'm barely starting my time. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that my heart meant what I prayed. And as soon as I got back to the general population from AdSeg, right away they give me an ice pick and they tell me who my next victim is. Just like that, I'm being thrown back into that animal
Wow.
state of mind of I need to attack again, They identified who it was, and I'm like, here I go. And I'm in the shower. I told them, I'm going to take a shower, I need to take a shower. And it was a dorm setting at that time, and the showers are really low, probably up to your chest area. And there's like a window, so you could see everybody while showering. And I remember at that moment, the cops came in and they removed that person that I was supposed to victimize. And I literally thought that that was my first prayer answered, because I was like, man, God, here I am asking you to help me in this situation. And, I'm already on my next move. And when the cops came in and they moved them, I kind of like looked up and was like, like, thank you, God. Like, is he really real?
Yes,
Did he really?
yeah, go ahead. That is, he can move people, he can close ears and open mouths, and right? And so he did that. So what happened next?
So after that, I end up going back. I end up coming out of my shower, and they were like, "All right, everything's cool." And in the situation, I mean, in the housing in which they put me in this dorm setting, they put me in the middle of a bunch of African Americans. The black population of the jail. And at that time, LA County Jail is very prejudiced. I mean, LA County Jail, there's riots all the time between different races. Especially between the blacks and the Latino community, the Hispanics, the Mexicans, specifically. And the Mexican gang members came to me like, hey, don't trip. Like, tomorrow we're going to move you to our side. So I was like, okay. So I'm like, whatever, you know what I mean? I ain't tripping. So they ended up telling me the only thing is, oh, you're going to be bunked up with this Christian guy. So when they said that, I was like, I'm looking up again, like,
Number two.
God, I'm like, God, what are you doing here? Like, what is going on here? So I ended up going to this bunk with this Christian guy who's an ex gang member. He's an ex, what we call cholos over here, in Southern California. Um, they're the Mexican gang members, right? We have that moniker as a cholo, and and he's an ex cholo, and I'm like, "What's up? How you doing?" And he was like, "Good, man. How you doing?" And we really didn't talk much. He used to go to Bible studies, and I would go over there. I was gambling in there. I was still kind of doing my own thing, but still, like, God was like speaking to me at this time. And one day I used the phone and I called home, and my wife at the time, and I kind of bypassed that, but you know what? Don't let me go no further until I tell you about my wife, okay?
Okay.
My wife was same age as me, gang member from my neighborhood. The case that I told you that I got in trouble for at 16 years old, okay?
Yes.
When I was arrested at 16 years old, tried as an adult and everything, I was there for a year fighting my case.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up having a short release. They dismissed my case. It was a DA reject. So when I got out, I ended up getting with my girlfriend at the time, who's a homegirl. She's a gang member. She's just like me. She's like one of the leaders of the girls, not by title, but she had a lot of influence. And what happened is, I ended up getting her pregnant, and we were young. She was 16. I think I was 17 at the time.
17,
I
yeah.
think we were just a few months off. We're just like literally, my birthday is January, hers is in May. All right. So I turned
Mm-hmm.
17 before she did and whatever. And we ended up getting married in Nevada and Las Vegas. They do a
Mm-hmm.
lot of like quick little weddings in Las Vegas. They're known for that. So a bunch of my friends, a bunch of her friends, our homeboys, we all went to Las Vegas with our parents. Our parents had to sign for us because we were underage. They signed for us to get married. We got married. We came back a couple months. We got married in April. In
Mm-hmm.
July, I was rearrested for my case.
Oh,
So I, she got a bad deal. Everybody would have thought she got a bad deal, because, and let me just say, in my defense, when I had got out, when I was turning 17, when I got out after fighting it for that whole year, being 16, I started working. I got a legit job working. I was kind of staying away from my homeboys. I really wanted to be a good father, Jessica. I had told my father and my mother, like, I'm going to get my stuff together. I ain't selling drugs. I didn't have no weapons on me. I wasn't out on the streets. I mean, I was, but not as bad as I was prior. And I
mm-hmm.
had told my wife, me and my wife, even though we were young, my wife came from a hard upbringing as well. And we were talking like adults. We were like, let's save up our money, let's get an apartment, let's get away from the neighborhood, and let's raise this kid. And that was the goal.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was rearrested, I mean, everything came down, and I was trying to explain to her, like, babe, like, I didn't, like, this wasn't planned, you know what I'm saying? Like, I was doing good, this happened before I even met you, this happened, um,
So is that when you got the sentence? Was when you were rearrested?
when I was rearrested. Yeah,
So,
they rearrested me. It was almost a year later that they rearrested me. I left my wife when she was still pregnant. She was still pregnant at the time. And what's so crazy, Jessica, is that when my jury was deliberating and when they came back with my guilty conviction,
mm-hmm.
when they found me guilty, my wife gave birth to my son, my first son, on that same day. That
Wow.
is crazy. Yeah, September
It is
26th of
crazy.
1991. Yeah, so anyways, my wife ends up, she ends up, being by my side the whole time. So I end up calling her that day when I'm still in the county jail, and she told me that one of my good friends had got killed, and I started banging the phone. I was so mad. I went back to my bunk, and this homeboy, this cholo, his name was Gabriel. And he starts telling me, this was the first time he starts preaching in my bunkie. He starts telling me, he said, the only one that could get that rage out of your life is the Lord Jesus Christ. And I took it offensive. I just found out my good homeboy was killed. And here he is trying to tell me about Jesus, about this love, about my anger, trying to like, tell me what's going to set me free. And I'm angry, and I'm like, you need to get out of my face. Right now is not a good time, and we just started talking, and that conversation ended up going for almost 3 hours, 4 hours. We ended up just conversating, debating, um, and then at the end of all of that, he ends up telling me, he said, if you were to die tonight, where would you spend eternity? And I said, I believe I'll go to heaven. I believe in God, you know what I mean? And he starts telling me about you need to be born again. And I was like, what does that all mean? What are you talking about, born again? I don't know nothing about any of this. And I didn't even know what I was getting myself into, but I told him, yeah, go ahead and pray for me. Yeah, I'll accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. I believe that he died and rose again and all of that good stuff. So he prayed with me, and I went to bed that night for the first time taking off my shoes. Prior to that, we used to go to sleep with our shoes on because in the middle of the night, there would be riots, things would happen, and I mean, that's the worst thing to do is try to be in a riot barefooted or in your socks or something. You know, 'cause you're gonna be slipping and sliding everywhere. So we always slept with our shoes on. This was the first night I took my shoes off, and I had like a righteous peace in my heart. And I woke up early that morning before everybody else. The lights were still off, and I was just looking around at everybody, and it was as if I had this this awakening that I seen people as humans. I didn't see the blacks as enemies. I didn't I seen everybody as like it's weird when I explain it because it was as if God had gave me a compassionate heart throughout that night. When I woke up, it was like I wanted to help people immediately, to feel this peace. And I didn't know what to expect because like I said, I was a young gang member getting ready to do a life term. I'm all involved in the politics. I'm an assassin, for the higher ups, and I didn't know what to expect. You know what I mean? I didn't know what to tell anybody. I didn't know to go tell people, during the night, God touched my heart. I'm a different man. I didn't know what to expect. So I kind of just played it by ear and just um I woke up and that guy Gabriel, well, it's funny. My wife likes to refer to him as my guardian angel at that moment because what happens is Gabriel stood there with me for only 2 weeks and then he was let go, and it was as if he came, delivered the message, and was gone. And
That's incredible. Like, look at that. You could see where God was moving in when he eliminated that one person from the shower area and how then he put Gabriel in your cell and he's gone in 2 weeks. All of the even when I was reading your testimony on trapfamilies.com, and you were describing just what you did here, and so powerful. Like within a moment you were a changed person. Like, I mean, he was working on you, but because you took that action, not even knowing the action that you were taking, he just changed you. And you said you immediately saw things differently and you immediately wanted to help people. And that's like the power of God. It's so big and powerful, and it's delivered by people we wouldn't think would have delivered it. And it's a really good example that it's really like it really happens. When I
yeah,
was in Colorado, I heard this pastor say a line that I never forgot. And he said, God can deliver the most hardened criminal or the sickest drug addict in 1 second flat. And I was like, when he said that, I thought, he absolutely can. And I would have never believed that either. When somebody was trying to pray for me, I remember thinking, pray for yourself. Like I had the same response like when Gabriel came to you when you were having all that rage. Like, um, but he continues on and he gets to you when he gets to you, and then your life's changed. It's incredible. If you
yeah,
continue, please.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so scared though, Jessica, when he left. Like I said, he was with me for only 2 weeks. And during them 2 weeks, we did everything together. You know what I mean? I even announced like, to the higher above. I was like, and I didn't know, Jessica. I didn't know if I was having like a mental breakdown. I don't know what was going on. And I told him that. I gave him my knife and I told him, I said, you need to hold on to this. I don't know what's going on with me, but my bunkie been inviting me to church, and what's so surprisingly is that I thought there was going to be a lot of resistance, and all glory to God because they actually like they gave me a pat. They were like, go for it, man. Go to church. And I
Really?
thought there was going to be repercussions. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
'Cause at the status that I was at, you normally just don't walk away from that. There's a
So
saying
what
over
happened
here.
there? Like,
Yeah,
so
it was all
peace.
miraculous. It was all
Yeah, it's all
miraculous
miraculous
favor,
too.
with all the right people because normally, there's other repercussions that follow somebody coming and telling them they're getting right away. They think you a snitch. They think you're getting soft. They think something else is going on. And for me though, I don't know. For me though, I didn't. Like I said, I didn't know what was going on, and I was just trusting the Holy Spirit. And what's so crazy is like after them 2 weeks, Jessica, when he left, Like during them 2 weeks, I was learning from Gabriel. Gabriel was just feeding me, feeding me, feeding me. He's treating me like a baby, telling me the rights and the wrongs, and telling me to stay away from that gambling table. Stay away from them meetings between the gang members. He was like, "You're not about that no more. You're born again. You're a new person." And I was like, "Okay, okay, okay." And then when he left, it was as if I really identified myself as a sheep among wolves. You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, they're
Mhm.
going to try to eat me up now because I'm by myself. But it was then that I believed that I was filled with the Holy Spirit, and it was now God speaking to me, directly. He was using Gabriel for them 2 weeks, but when Gabriel left and I was in the Word of God and I was just, it was God like giving me strength and started to guide my steps. And it was during this time that miracles after miracles started happening. And I don't know if you've seen through my website, I do have a book out. My autobiography is out. Yeah, it's on Amazon.
Yes.
They could find it. It's called Reformed: How a Life Sentence Became My Saving Grace. And I share a lot of the early miracles that took place. And in that book, I shared this one specific miracle, and I'm not going to go through them all, of course, but this one specific one that I believe was very humbling and challenging and threatening, all in the same mix. Because remember, I told you LA County Jail is very, very racist, very prejudiced, very, you stand by your own people no matter what. And when I got saved, God really gave me a heart to just love like-minded believers, including the blacks. I didn't see the blacks as blacks no more as enemies or any of that. I didn't see the whites as an enemy. I seen them now as, brothers in the Lord. And that's the way I addressed them, and that's the way I embraced them. And we would, sit down and have Bible studies and talk, and I spend a lot of time within these interracial circles of Bible studies. And one day we had this big riot. But before this riot, we were in a prayer circle, and the other Mexican gang members, they came and they tapped me on the shoulder and they're like, "Hey, Jojo, let me talk to you." And I said, "What's up?" They're like, "Go over there where all the homies are because something's about to kick off. Something's about to happen." And I looked around, everything's quiet. I mean, in LA County Jail, when it gets quiet, that's a bad scene. It's a bad scene. Because normally it's not like a beehive. Everybody's talking and there's movement and everything. And that's normal. But when everything gets quiet, that's like the quiet before the storm. And I look around, I'm like, oh man, something's about to happen. And then when I go back to the Christian brothers and I tell them, I said, we need to pray right now. We need to pray, something's happening. And the black brothers are like encouraging me to go over there with your crowd, with your people. And I was like, you are my people. Like we need to stay together. We need to pray. He was like, go over there where you'll be safe. Go over there with your people, and we'll be praying. And I told him, no, we need to pray now. And in the middle of that prayer, um, a big riot happened. In this riot, two blacks ended up getting killed, and that's how serious it is in LA County. I mean, a riot in there. I mean, there's going to be blood. And what happened is the Mexicans had like kind of like the victory. You would say they won that Royal Rumble, whatever. They got the upper hand, and all the blacks were in the front by the cages where the cops are and stuff. And um, the Mexicans, they started celebrating and they're like excited. And somebody says within the Mexican circle there's more blacks in the back, which were the Christians. The Christian black brothers were in the back, and they were already in the process, Jessica, of running over there and attacking them. And God had me run over there and stand in front of my black brother. I literally put my hands up and said, "You can't touch these brothers. You need to leave them alone." And when right after that happened, like it was crazy though, because they're coming and they already have knives out and they're about to stab me, and they stop and they just leave the blacks alone. The Christian brothers that were there, they were safe. Nothing happened to them. And when they separated all of us, when the cops came in, they came and they shot at us, with the rubber bullets, and they maced us and everything. And then they end up separating all of us. They put all the Mexicans in one big holding tank, all the African Americans in another tank. And then all the Mexicans were all excited. They were celebrating, showing their battle wounds and stuff. And I'm right there, and they were like, "Oh, Jojo, we saw you, man. You were fighting." I was like, "No, I wasn't. I was praying. I was praying." And they were like, "Nah, we saw you. You were fighting like everybody else." And I was like, no, I wasn't, and I realized, like, you know what, they're setting me up, they're getting ready. You don't ever stand against your own race, ever. That's like a death sentence on the spot.
Right.
And there was this other Mexican there that was a gang member, but he had been going to church and he had been saying he was a Christian. And when you don't get involved, they end up victimizing you. And sure enough, Jessica, within seconds of them separating all of us, when we're in our own tank now, there's no more blacks with us. We're just all Mexicans. They end up beating that other Christian up. I mean, they like broke his jaw, his eye. It looked like it
Oh,
was coming out of his socket. It was like, and I went over there and ran to him, which was like strike number two. You don't come to the rescue of somebody that has it coming. And I'm like, I'm just messing up left and right. You know what I mean? I'm like
right.
doing things that normally I shouldn't be doing, and I know better. But the Holy Spirit in me is moving. So I have my back against the wall the whole time, Jessica, thinking at any moment, it's my turn, any moment. And I had other young gang members come up to me and tell me, "Hey, man, that was cool what you did for your Christian brothers." And I'm thinking in my whole head, I know this little, you know, facade. I know it's not true. I know these three are probably the same ones that are going to stab me right now. These three are the same ones that are going to try to, really hurt me for what I did. But come to find out, that was like the beginning of my ministry, my prison ministry that would take place for the next almost 12, 13 years, of being a Christian, going through the youth prison to the adult prison as a Christian. And I never had a fight. I never had a fight the rest of my term. I never had a and
That's
that's who I
great.
was, though. I was a fighter. I mean, my nickname, Jessica, and I don't want to sound all gangbang, on you, but my nickname was Boxer. That's what they called me because I was always fighting, you know what I mean? And of course, it was kind of like my reputation as a fighter. And throughout my prison time, it was as if God just kept setting up miracles after miracles. I mean, I'm talking about real miracles. I'm talking about healings, people in wheelchairs, that couldn't walk. And, it's just crazy how behind the walls God was able to move. So for the next 12, almost 13 years, I had just established this reputation as a Christian ex-homeboy, but it wasn't like I was shunned from anything. I had a lot of respect, and people really felt I was a righteous Christian. In there's a lot of people that hide behind the Bible, and there's usually consequences. If the general population ever feels like you're faking it, you're hiding behind the Bible or anything like that, they'll stab you, they'll beat you up, they'll call you fake, they'll, kind of put you in a position to make you fight, make you like try to prove that, I told you he wasn't Christian. Look at.
Right.
And for me, it was as if God gave me favor. I mean, I always had all the high end jobs in there as an inmate could have. I always had like the highest pay numbers. I had a lot of favor with the guards, with the higher ups and with the prisoners. It was as if God did give me favor with man. And my wife continued, of course, my son was born on that day that I was found guilty. So my wife traveled throughout the state of California to different prisons, bringing my son, allowing me to have a relationship with him and her, and it's very rare to find somebody like that, especially she didn't know if I was ever coming home. Like I said, here in California, when you're sentenced to life, that means life. Our governors had emphasized many of times that, if you have life, the only way you're getting out is in a box. That's it. But
Hmm.
by God's grace, I ended up coming back to court a couple of times on appeals, and my sentence was reduced. I still had the life term, but instead of 45 years to life, I had got like 25 to life, and then I got life plus 5, which gave me an eligible parole date. Um, so like I said, I was originally arrested in 1989. In
Hmm.
2003, a miracle took place. And it's a long story. The whole process of me getting out, our governor was being recalled. They wanted to dismantle the board of prison terms here in California. There was a lot of things behind the stage, and God used it all and was able to open the doors for me. Um,
Wow.
during that year, during that year of 2003, I was involved in a substance abuse program inside of the prison system. It was called Walden House. Here on the West Coast, Walden House has a big name in the recovery field. It's a behavioral modification program, especially for parolees. I mean, you had to be on parole to go through this program. There was one base in San Francisco, which was like the mothership. That's where it was founded back in 1960. I want to say 1967, during like the hippie era in San Francisco. The whole, there was a big hippie move and a lot of homeless people, and that's how our program was birthed. But now in 2003, we have a program in the prison. So I went through that program. I became a certified drug and alcohol counselor. Um,
Okay.
a behavioral modification counselor. Even while incarcerated, we were going to college. I was doing all my courses in there. And then when I came home, I went through residential treatment. And the residential treatment that I went through, it wasn't really 12-step based. It was a therapeutic community where it's kind of like it was like the old school attack therapy, to tell you the truth, because it was more addressing behaviors. Of course, within that, we address addiction and whatnot, but they cover the whole psychosocial. And what happened is I was there, and I ended up staying a part of that for almost a year, between residential and outpatient. And then I became a drug and alcohol counselor there, with the program. I was so excited. My wife almost killed me because I was doing construction, making good money, and I left it to become an entry level counselor. And I took a big pay cut to do that. But my heart was like, I'm so grateful to the program. They taught me how to identify, my triggers and my character defects, and um, a lot of different things surrounding not just my substance addiction, but my behavioral addictions. And I mean, they just helped me deal with a lot of things, especially transitioning from prison back into society, being in that residential, because we had passes. So I would go home with my wife, and I didn't know how to be a husband. I didn't know how to be a father. I never had a real job ever. I mean, I got arrested so young that I was in denial of a lot of things. I never thought, because the drinking that I used,
How many
uh,
years from when your son was born that day that you got sentenced, how many years did you actually serve out
by
of?
the time I came home, you mean?
Yeah.
I ended up serving altogether. It was about from 1989 to 2000 and 2000 and it was 2003. Yeah, with that small gap that I told you, I got out, got married, and got her pregnant.
Right.
Yeah, so coming home, it was so hard learning how to be a father, learning how to be a husband, learning how to give it in the workforce. But all them years in prison, I had taken a lot of parenting, I had taken a lot of self-help classes to help me, transition. I had pastors that would tell me, you know what, Jojo, you never know when God's going to open the door, so you need to be ready.
Hmm.
Because everybody used to tell me in there, why are you doing all these college courses? Why are you doing all this stuff where you're never going home? That's what they would tell me. The inmate pop, and even the cops would even tell me that sometimes. Like, I don't know why you're, investing in all this other stuff, when you're not going to go home. And I had to look past that and be like, you know what? I have to have faith that if God does open the doors, I'm going to be ready. And when I came home, I used a lot of the skills and the gifts that I used while in there. And I came home, I started working in carpentry before I became, while I was in treatment, I ended up becoming, while I was in treatment, I was a carpenter. So I was doing construction. But all of that though ended up, I mean, the tools that I learned in there, I applied when I came home.
Hmm.
So to kind of speed up the story, I come home from outpatient residential. I ended up I I couldn't go back to my same city, which we had a house. My wife had, bless my wife. She was a young single mother. She got her first house on her own. She like really, really hustled. And if you know anything about California, ain't nothing cheap out here.
Right.
And for her to get a house, and then when I got released, my parole officer told me I can't go back to my city that I was arrested for. So we ended up relocating not too far, but out of the city. And I came
Hmm.
home and started my life, in 2003. Like I said, I was doing construction. I worked a couple warehouses to eventually when I became a counselor. and it was so it was exciting, but it was scary. There was a time after about a year of being in society that um, I woke up one day and I was crying to my wife, and I told her, "Babe, you know what? I feel like I want to go back to prison." And she didn't like get it though, because it was I was so stressed out from the good stuff that was happening. And as a recovering addict, man, it's so easy to self-sabotage the good stuff that's going on. I felt like some people say that I had like that survivor's guilt because I was still writing to a lot of lifers, and I kind of felt
Mm-hmm.
like I didn't deserve to be home. I didn't deserve all this success, and it was like I was looking for a way to kind of mess it up, like I don't it was getting difficult too, because my son's a teenager at this time now. He's a teenager, and you know, um, we started going through some issues as I'm trying to discipline him and stuff, and it was kind of crazy, and it was just a lot of pressure. I felt a lot of pressure doing the right thing in life for once. People see me today and see where I'm at with my wife, my kids, my homes. My different. I have my own business. Besides Trap Families, I have another business, and they see the success, but they don't understand the struggle and what it took to get to where I'm at today. And I give so much credit to my wife. My wife has been like the backbone for reals. My wife has been the one to kick me when I was down. She like
Mm-hmm.
not kicked me down, but she kicked me up. She's like, you need to get up. You need to get up and believe in yourself. And I always tell her it's easier said than done. But she said, you could do it. I know you could do it. And
Mm-hmm.
she's been there. She's my biggest supporter. You know what I mean? And next to Jesus Christ being Lord and Savior, she's the best thing that's ever happened in my life. She's a good mom. She's a hard worker. She's a great encourager. Because when I feel down or something, she's there to pick me up. You know what I mean? More than often. And
Yeah.
so today, after all that, and we've had our struggles with Jessica. Don't get me wrong. Coming home, like I said, coming home, I didn't know how to be a father. I didn't know how to be a husband. The Walden House program, they helped me in a lot of that, through counseling, through speaking to my therapist and stuff. I worked with all of them. I'm not too proud to say, I used a lot of resources to help me get to where I'm at today. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people I learned in recovery, you know, um, don't stay stuck in my secrets. I need to talk about it. I need to talk what I'm feeling. And because there was times where I felt like hurting my wife sometimes because of the challenges that she would give me. But
Right.
it was like, that's all it was. It was just her challenging me to be better, and to
Yeah.
accomplish more and it was, it was difficult at the time. You know what I'm saying? As a
Sure.
man, I felt prideful, like, just I got this. I don't need help from nobody. But every time I stepped out of my comfort zone and asked for help and support, it was as if, the course of life became so much more easier, not
Yeah.
trying to figure it out on my own. And then, so yeah, so here I am today, and what I'm involved in today and what I have been involved for the last 20 years of coming home is helping families, with their addicted loved ones and their loved ones that are caught up in the criminal lifestyle, and that's been my passion since God delivered me from it. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I said in the beginning, it's been so easy for me to um, be comfortable in doing what I do and helping families. Yeah, it hurt seeing them cry and see them going through the transitions of losing their loved ones to the system or to. I have a good friend, and he was just showing me a video of his younger brother that's he's bad on drugs and was showing me him sleeping on the side of the road and stuff, and I was like, oh man, because I knew his brother before he became addicted. And
Mm-hmm.
then, I'm there with them trying to help them get through that. And it's so hard on them because he doesn't want help. So they feel like, what can we do?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm at. That's why I said I love what I do, but at the same time, I hate what I do. I'm kind of,
Right. Yeah.
it's, I hate going through that. But yeah, that's what I'm doing today, Jessica, helping
Yeah.
families. Um,
Can you talk about trapped families? Because like I had mentioned earlier, I had watched a couple episodes where you were able to have guests come on that talk about their loved ones who are incarcerated or who are going through tough challenges like addiction and such. So, can you talk a little bit about trapped families, what
Yeah,
that is, and what?
yeah, so Trap Families, it's a support network of the families, like I said, the addicted and the incarcerated. And it's an online community. I do have an online membership where, they gather 24/7 and they talk about things that only they can relate to because it's kind of like a secret society. Families, they don't usually brag about their loved ones being addicted to drugs or being incarcerated. It's not something you go to work and share. And I know this through my own family and them living
Sure.
this secret life. My wife for many, many years didn't tell her coworkers that they knew she was married, but I was never in the picture at their gatherings, their Christmas parties, their um just different functions. They were like, "Where's your husband?" "Oh, he couldn't make it. He's working." And she had to do that for years and years. And so I get it. I get it from other families that are going through this, like they don't want to
Yeah.
share it and there's nobody that they really open up to. So when I introduce myself and share my story, it's kind of like they put their guard down and they're like, okay, he understands. And I'd like to share about my mom. I lost my mom while I was incarcerated. And my mom, Jessica, like I said in the beginning, she was by my side to the very end. It was very unconditional love with my mom. In my mom's eyes, I couldn't do no wrong. I hate that she was an enabler, but at the same time, you know, she did everything possible for me to have a good life. I chose, I know now, I can't blame nobody but myself. I mean, I chose that gangster life and the consequences that came with it, but my mom and dad, they taught me how to live. They taught me how to live right. They taught me how to be courteous. They taught me how to respect, people and stuff. And I know there's no such thing as a good criminal or a good gang member or nothing. But
Mhm.
I had the morals where the only ones I wanted to hurt were my enemies that I recognized as mine. I wasn't the type to go rob old people. I wasn't, trying to hurt anybody that wasn't trying to hurt me. I mean, that's my justification of what I was doing. And like I said, it doesn't make me a good criminal or a bad criminal because at the end of the day, I was hurting everybody. You know what I mean? My family,
Yeah.
my victims' families, they didn't have nothing to do with it. You know what I'm saying? But it is what it is. That's what I went
So, what would you say to anyone listening who, and we talked earlier about your past does not have to determine your future. So if somebody's listening that has a past that is marked with like addiction or felonies or whatever they acquired along that path, and they think, well, I can't drop that off. How am I going to make a future? What would you say? Because you definitely did that.
Yeah, I would say that all things are possible, to the person that's willing to believe, in a higher power of some sort, even to their own selves, being determined to make a difference, when they have that understanding, like you said, like I had that same, I mean, I was taught that early in my recovery that my past doesn't have to be my future, because all my past was ugly. And it took new understandings, though. It took me being able to step out of my comfort zone and ask for help. I remember being young. My father told me, whatever you want to be, you need to surround yourself with them people. And I wanted to be successful. So I started reaching out to people that I normally wouldn't have reached out to for support and help. When I would go to meetings and stuff, and I would hear somebody share their story, I would like, damn, that guy's doing it. And I would go grab onto him and I'd be like, hey, bro, listen, I don't know how to do this. I'm new to this recovery thing. I'm still trying to, figure out my purpose and my calling. And sure enough, I had people that stepped in and would sponsor me, be my mentor, and walk me through the process. So the first thing is surrenderance. I mean, in recovery, that's the most important thing is just surrendering and saying, you know what? I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And that's tough because as a human being, we're prideful people and we'll figure it out on our own. And I'll learn this on my own or I'll get it right. I don't need other people
Yeah.
to tell me what to
I was
do.
thinking of that word surrender because when that's kind of what you did when you were in jail. You said, God, I need to know you're real. And
Yeah.
please forgive me. So you surrendered in a sense for whatever reason that
Yeah.
night. And then
Yeah.
everything
So
changed.
yeah, everything changed, but you know what? I had to keep surrendering. Every time
Right.
I was challenged with different
Daily
changing
surrender.
dynamics, I had to surrender. When I was in recovery, I had to wear a sign around my chest. I had a string and a cardboard sign that said, "I know everything, so don't tell me nothing."
Okay.
And,
Well, I
and
love that. Oh, I love that you said that you had to keep doing it, and that what came into my mind was daily surrender, and sometimes I forget that. I'm like, because it's still now, it's a daily surrender,
oh
right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I
but it's
mean,
funny you had to wear that because we know.
yeah, yeah. And at this time, though, because by the time I came home, I had already had like 3 years. I had more clean times than some of the counselors and therapists there. So I was kind of like arrogant, like, ah, man, I don't want to sit in these groups because I had been sitting in them groups throughout prison. And
Yeah,
now I'm free and I wanted to live free, but here I am still in groups and everything. And the program really, really helped to humble me and remind me to be grateful, because that first day out of prison, I was so grateful, Jessica. I was so happy. I'm looking at downtown LA skyline and I'm like just grateful. But 30 days into the program, I'm like, I want to go home now. I want to leave. I already have this figured out. But after 30 days going on passes, I realized I don't have this figured out. When I was at home with my son and my wife, it was scary. I mean, I was like, I don't have this figured out. I couldn't get back to the program quick enough to talk about how I felt.
yeah.
So for anybody
I
in
think it's
anybody listening or will listen later on, in early recovery, it's kind of like, you can't do anything that you want to do. You literally have to be programmed under other people's advice and guidance because we know how to fail all on our own, but it takes a lot. It takes a village for us to succeed, and um, I credit that success to all my sponsors, my mentors, and everyone else that has walked me down the journey. And I've used multiple people, you know, regarding like my cravings and my triggers and stuff. I use a certain mentor. And then for my relationship issues with my wife and my kids, I use another mentor. And for the steps, I use a sponsor. And I mean, I use so many different people. You know what I'm saying? It's like
yeah.
the real world. If I want somebody to come fix my house, I can't get the carpenter to do the plumbing or the flooring or the roofing. Like everybody has their specialties. And I used the whole toolbox of recovery
Love
for
that.
me to get to where I'm at. And I still call my mentors. I still call, people that have spoken in my life into my life, especially when I get stressed out and I feel, a real, real strong struggle in my life. I definitely call somebody and tell them, hey, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm going through. I need your advice. And I take it and I run with it. So, and the best and the main thing is separating yourself from your old friends, your old surroundings, because it's so easy to want to do good in the wrong place, and that wrong place just overpowers you. I see that so often in recovery. Somebody get clean and sober for a couple of months and want to go save all their old friends and their old girlfriends that are still in their addiction. And it's like it doesn't work. You can't go and save them.
Yeah.
You're still literally like a baby at 6 months clean and sober.
So true. Right.
Yeah.
You ever hear that table metaphor? It's like there's a table and the person that has recovery is on the table and they're like, have their hand and they reach down to the people that don't have it. And they're like, hey, come up here. It's so great up here. You get free, get up here. And they say, once you put your hand down, is it easier to pull that person up or is it easier to pull that person off the table?
It's
And it's so much easier. So you got to like safeguard
yeah.
exactly what you just said, and that's where
Yeah.
people fall out and they go back into that relationship with that person or they go back into that group. And so you really have to safeguard yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw that first over the years, people wanting to do good but go back to their old surroundings and so easily just jack up everything so quick. And that's why I tell people all the time. I said, I understand you have a heart and you want to go and get these people, you want to show them the good life, but I said, you got to guard yourself and don't ever go alone. And, don't get so comfortable where you feel like it's okay. Because I always tell people in recovery, man, you can't just go and intertwine with that old lifestyle and thinking everything. They're like, yeah, I'm gonna go to this party, but even though they're drinking and using and stuff, I'm not gonna use it. I'm clean and sober. Like, you ain't that
Hmm.
strong, bro.
Right.
Don't go. Why go and tempt yourself?
Right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's where I'm at, and I still that's one of my main speaking grounds today is I go to recovery programs and I just share the process of change in my life and that it is possible. If I
Hmm.
could do it, you can do it. Because with all of my handicaps and hiccups and struggles in life, I said, you know what, I was able to overcome them, and I need to get you to buy in that you can overcome as well. So. I love speaking in colleges and universities, churches and everything, but my go-to is the recovery homes.
Hmm. Yeah, you
Yeah.
do a good job. So where can people find you?
Because I think I sent you my link tree. I don't know if you could attach it anywhere
I will
in.
put it, yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. It has,
They
what does
could
it
they
have?
could
The
find me.
website?
They could find me on Instagram. They could find me on Facebook. Everything is tagged Trap Families. So I mean, I don't know how many things. A lot of people, when I give them that, just look me up, Trap Families. They usually find me pretty easily. So I
Okay,
mean,
good.
I don't really look up myself, because I'm on there.
Yeah.
And on YouTube, it's YouTube at Trap Families to find my podcast on there. And then my webpage, for services is at www.trapfamilies.com. And in there, I do have a finding section where I could give a free video session, just to kind of touch base to see if, they could use my services or not. It's totally free. Um, and yeah, that's it. They can find my book on Amazon, my whole
Yeah,
complete
give us the
story.
name of your book again.
It's called Reformed: How a Life
Reformed.
Sentence Became My Saving Grace.
Great, great.
Yeah, so they could look me up on Amazon. In Amazon, it's so much easier to just put my name in the Amazon search. Just put
Mhm.
Jojo Godinez in the search bar, and my book will pop right up.
Great. And that's Godinez.
Yes,
Excellent.
Jojo Godinez. Yeah. And
Great.
yeah, other than that, every day I'm just, trying to be a better person than yesterday.
I love that you came on. I'm so grateful. I've watched those and I'm going to continue to watch each episode. And I encourage listeners to watch too. It's Trapped Families. You can find it on YouTube. I'll put everything in the show notes. I love that you came on here and shared about how your past does not have to determine your future. But then also, I haven't heard listeners in a while, or guests, I'm sorry, in a while, talk about the power of God. And you really talked about the power of God and how He transformed your life, and that was real. And I love that you shared it. So thank you
Yeah.
for being here.
I appreciate it, Jessica. And just a little side note on that right there, though, because a lot of people, they have a hard time, with the whole religious concept. So I meet people where they're at. I have so many Muslim friends. I have atheist friends. I have transgender. I have homosexual friends. I mean, I make it a point where I just show the love of God and meet people where they're at. I mean, main thing for me in trap families is meeting the families where they're at. And like I tell people all the time, this is my story. This is where I'm at. Especially for the addict. I said, my job right now is to get you clean and sober, get you in your right state of mind, and then you'll be able to process, the other matters which are regarding eternity, because there is
Mhm.
an eternity. I said, our life right here is very short and it's very quick, but there's decisions to be made for the afterlife. So
Yes.
I kind of hit them there, you know what I mean, and try to.
I think it's really important that love that you just said that because that's how I feel about this podcast. When I would have Christians come on or otherwise, I didn't want somebody to think if they were not that they were not allowed here, right? Because everybody's
Yeah,
story is their story. And had that been put on me, I would have never, if I didn't have the space to believe what I wanted to believe during the years that I believed I would have never been able to I wouldn't have showed up. I wouldn't have showed back up. So it's
yeah,
important. I'm glad you said that, and I'll make sure that that's properly represented before we air this,
yeah,
because it matters. You don't deflect people because of a certain word, like
yeah, yeah. Right away, people get turned off.
yes.
Oh, he's one of them
I
Bible
I know I
thumpers.
did.
He's one
You
of the
know,
ones that are going to judge me, you know?
yeah,
No.
so yeah, for sure. You know, the person that this is just off record, but I'll take it out. But it's interesting because when after I got sober, I didn't like, I mean, I grew up Catholic and as you did, and then I tried a bunch of different Native American, I just landed, you know, as tarot card, whatever. And this, one of my friends would come over a lot and he was a Christian. I would hit my foot and I'd say, Jesus, you know, and he'd say, oh, I said, oh, sorry, I know that's your. And he said, listen, it doesn't matter how many times you say it because it's like your heart has a mark on it, like 365. So if you
Mm.
say Jesus, you know, because you hit your foot, he's going to take it down to 364. When you get to zero, he's going to be in your heart. And I mean, this guy, he was covered in tattoos, black eyeliner, black nail polish. It's like God said, well, if you don't receive it from him, she's not coming. So he was the one that taught me about the love of but I wouldn't go to him. It didn't happen for me until that he was long gone. He was like my 2 week, he was like your 2 week Gabriel. You know, like he came in and touched my life and taught me things that I wouldn't have known about, like poured into me. And then it wasn't until years later that I would see him in a store and he said, and I just would catch myself and he said, I said, everything happened that you said, everything. And he was like, wow. And he died. He's no longer here. He died
Mhm.
from addiction. But you know, people are placed in your life and they just change your life changes. It's like God sent them directly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really wild. But anyway, we'll end off here. We're going over.
Mhm.
But thank you for being here. And I encourage listeners to connect with you further.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Jessica, for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. We'll talk soon.